When we get dressed in the morning, we're not just putting on clothes. It doesn't matter if your clothes live in a pile on the middle of the floor and you just grab whatever you put on because you have a few minutes to get to the train. We've all had that morning. I had that morning. When you put on clothes in the morning, you're faced with a choice of images. Whether it's you're getting ready for a hot date, a job interview, or a night out on the town, you're not putting on clothes, you're putting on messages. You're putting on conversation pieces. We know that fashion has historically been thought about as related to power. Canonical thinkers like Thorstein Veblen, the brilliant social economist who gave us the term conspicuous consumption, says that fashion and style is about keeping class boundaries intact. That it's about rich people being able to say, well, we can afford to look amazing, you deal with being poor, whatever that is. That's what fashion is for Veblen. Someone like Dick Hebdige, the great mastermind of subcultural theory, emerges and says, that's not all true. That's not quite the way it is. For Hebdige, style emerges from the bottom. People who don't have resources take what they can get, take what they can use, and create meaning out of it that way, outside of the fashion system. So for Veblen, style goes from the top down. For Hebdige, it's from the bottom up. You can see this right now if you go to the Met to see the punk exhibition, which is definitely about how style has moved from the bottom up. I'm someone who's always been interested in the question of style. Before my family moved to New York, I spent my elementary years in St. Louis, Missouri. I was that kid in elementary school who wanted to wear hot pink leggings when all the other boys wore football jerseys or whatever that is. Yes. I thought maybe I could wear a football jersey too if I don't know, threw some diamonds on it or something like that. And those choices had consequences. I was called faggot. I was called sissy. And I was never, ever picked for kickball. That's why when I got to Yale in the American Studies program, I was very interested in thinking about the importance of style. Why do people care so much about the way they present themselves? Why do people care about the way that people present themselves? Here I am in the Branford Court on the Yale campus, and here's my baby right there. I'm walking in 10 days, so hooray for that. So I was very interested in the question of style, and I was interested in thinking that, style isn't just about trends. It's not just about following what a magazine says the hottest 10 looks are for spring. That's not style. Style is a kind of expression, that it is a way of turning inside out how you feel on the inside and sending messages to people about your personality, your likes, and your interests. Some people need to paint. Some people have to draw or whatever it is to express themselves. What I found in my research, that style is what allows some people to have that sense of aesthetic creativity and that aesthetic expression. 9 months ago, I moved to Richmond, Virginia, to take a postdoctoral fellowship at a liberal arts college in the area. Here I am in my favorite purple pants, the Patricia Field, if you're curious. And here's the University of Richmond, where I'm a current postdoctoral fellow. You can imagine what happens when these two things come together. I know what you're thinking. How can I stand in front of you on a panel about Brooklyn, in Brooklyn, on a talk about Brooklyn style, and take us 400 miles south to the capital of the Confederacy, below the Mason-Dixon line, and tell you about Brooklyn style? That's where things get interesting. See, whenever I tell anyone in Richmond that I'm from New York, the first thing they say to me is, well, how do you like Richmond? As if they're just waiting on me, the ever-elitist New Yorker, to say, it's fine commuting down here with you plebeians in the real America. Something like that. But what I actually tell them is, Richmond is a lot like Brooklyn. I tell them Richmond is a lot like Brooklyn. One of my favorite bars in Richmond is a space called Strange Matter. It lives right across from VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, which is one of the big kind of art schools in the city. They do this queer monthly party there called Beard. And the first time I went a few months ago, I was astonished by the space. You walk in, and the walls are caked in graffiti. Vintage video game consoles punctuate the space. People in a variety of styles that remind me of being at a bar in Brooklyn, a place perhaps like our own barcade here in Williamsburg. So, and at one time I photographed being at a party, and you can't really see what's happening. Maybe it's better that way. I Instagrammed this, yes, I Instagrammed this image, and I don't know if you can see what it says, but it says, "I swear to God, Richmond is just like North Brooklyn," 5 exclamation points. That's 16 weeks ago, right? I was able to see one of my favorite bands play at the National, which is a venue that's not unlike the Music Hall of Williamsburg. Let me tell you, I couldn't get tickets to see Sleigh Bells when they played here. It was sold out instantly. There's a definite to and fro between Richmond and Brooklyn. In fact, people in Richmond tell me, I have friends who did move to Brooklyn, or back and forth. People in Brooklyn tell me that they're from Richmond, etc. We know that Brooklyn would be the fourth largest city if it were its own city. We know that there's a strong creative class in Brooklyn: DJs, artists, musicians, culture industry professionals. We know that Brooklyn is growing. Of the 161,000 people who moved to New York City between 2010 and 2012, 66,000 of them moved to Brooklyn, compared to 33,000 who moved to Manhattan. We have shows like Girls and How to Make It in America and Two Broke Girls, and there are casting calls looking for people who look like they live in Brooklyn. They should remain nameless. Richmond is a city that, not unlike a lot of post-industrial cities, is trying to find itself in the kind of current social media 21st century moment. How does it attract young people and creatives to the city? Well, they do this by trying to foster a strong creative class. So there are leading advertising agencies in Richmond, a lot of art galleries, performance venues, etc. In fact, it's estimated that by 2018, the creative class in Richmond will expand by 18%. So there's a definite to and fro between Richmond and Brooklyn. Things get even more interesting when I tell people that I live in Williamsburg, which I'm going to just, between you and me, I hate telling people that, because then they're like, oh, well, of course, that's where you live. Right. I'm sorry my address causes you so much angst. And so I began to become interested in the question, what does it mean you look like you live in Brooklyn? You look like you live in Williamsburg. You look like you inhabit a certain space based on your own style. We're all familiar with this map. When someone says, it looks like you live in Brooklyn, what they're saying is that there is a sartorial map, or maybe a style map, of our urban environments. That the way we experience urban space has a lot to do with style. We all live in neighborhoods, but what if our neighborhoods weren't just ethnic enclaves? Or what if we weren't gathered in the same neighborhoods because of shared backgrounds or like interests? What if style is what brought us together? Instead of thinking about this map as an annoying assortment of weekend schedules, right? What if these were transfer points of how different styles existed and collaborated and moved throughout the city? What if each subway stop were nodal points of styles? We know that the styles in Chelsea are perhaps different than the styles in Fort Greene. The styles by Columbia are maybe different than the styles in Astoria. One of my favorite things about coming to Brooklyn is taking the L train. So this is an image I took my first weekend back in New York after being in Richmond, which, by the way, I came back basically every other weekend, so there's that. But nonetheless, this is one of the first things I saw getting in the L train at Bedford. And I want you to know this guy, his look, the sunglasses, the hat, the skirt, the pouch, and the necklace are all made of those little candy rope necklaces we all had as kids. And the necklace does, in fact, yes, say Candyman, in case you didn't get it. You can go to Hasidic Williamsburg and see Orthodox Jews in their particular kind of style. If you've been in Williamsburg, you know Leonora Russo. Yes, honey, yes. You know Leonora Russo, the original Williamsburgian, who's been here 60 years, who remembers when her rent was $25, who remembers when Bedford Avenue was a two-way street, who talks about the way that creative people and young people and artists and musicians have created a new sense of vitality in the neighborhood. And now that it's warm, I can't wait to see her sitting out with her fur coat and her little tea or whatever, just watching people pass, right? This is the ultimate in kind of street style and thinking about Brooklyn style as a thing. Last year, Madonna played at Madison Square Garden, and I was walking down Bedford back to my apartment, and I saw this impromptu performance happening at on the corner of Bedford. These people had presumably been at the Madonna concert, or though maybe not, but you can't see it. There are ghetto blasters. They're playing lots of loud Madonna music. This guy in the Vogue jersey, which also Patricia Field, is walking back and forth, serving in his stilettos for you. You can't see the crowd, but there's a crowd of people enjoying and watching the spectacle. This, for me, is the apex of the connection between the urban environment and style, how we experience style in the urban space. You know, I'm talking to you about style maps and the connection between style and public space. This is something that has interested photographers for quite some time. You know, now we have style blogs, we have Garçon Story, we have the Sartori list, we have all these street blogs, but actually, Jamal Shabazz was one of the first style photographers in the 1980s to photograph the specific way that black youths in New York, so Harlem and Brooklyn in particular, and particularly involved in the hip hop communities, were expressing themselves. So here are two images of that. And the great thing about it is that not only is Miss Honey here in the white wearing that white belt, but these images both look like they could be today. You can see these looks somewhere in the city right now. The thing that strikes me, though, the most is what's happening in this image. They're in what? Subway car. They're moving. They're going someplace or coming to from someplace, right? Which again gets at the issue of style, movement, transience, and the city. The Afro-Punk Music Festival, which happens in August in Fort Greene, was, for me, when I went last summer, an amazing assortment of styles, all gathered in the same space. If style is a map, if there's a map to style, what does that mean? Well, I think it means that style is a kind of communication. You know, I said that when you get dressed in the morning, you're not just putting on clothes, you're putting on a message. You're putting on conversation pieces. When you get dressed, you're delivering messages about who you are, what you're like as a person, your background, your interests. You know, I have a friend who says, I don't date guys who wear polos, so just FYI for people. Yes, and so in that way, style becomes, it repels as well as it attracts, right? So you're drawn to people because of particular kinds of things they emit, and maybe you're not drawn to that because you don't want to have to deal with that. So if all these people are living in the same neighborhoods and have a similar sense of style, right? If you can look at this image and see that there's a certain style language here, where does individuality go? If everyone in the neighborhood is shopping in the same space or has the same haircut or the same dip dye or whatever it is, where does individuality come from? Well, if style is a kind of communication, I think that we get individuality by looking and borrowing and learning from other people. So I might look at you and say, oh, I like your haircut. What would happen if I did mine to the other side? What if I dyed mine green, not blue? What if I cut off my pants a little bit higher than your pants? Or whatever, you know. This is how individuality happens. You see something and you borrow it and make it your own, right? So I've talked to you today about the importance of style, how it's a mode of self-expression, a mode of creativity. We know now that there are style maps that exist in New York City, but in most cities and all cities. I bet if you think about your hometown or wherever you go or what other cities you've been to, you'll be able to imagine and see how certain styles congregate in different neighborhoods. So as you go now out into the world, and as you take the L train back to wherever, and as you take whatever train, think about how style helps to create relationships. You're sending out messages. So when you get dressed tomorrow, think about what you're going to say. What will your message be? Thanks.